Hello, everyone. Please join us in a session. Please sit down here in the chairs provided. And yeah, yes, please sit down. No, it's fine. I can stand. All right. With all of us, little space that we have here. My name is Bing Parcon. I'm the Asia Program Officer of the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights. This session is actually basically talk about how the sexual and reproductive health and rights movement and the HIV movement can work together, and why we are actually here. We also invited some speakers from the ambassador of SRH, the Dutch ambassador of SRH, and Mr. Murray Proctor. He's also the board of the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria. And this is we think that as movement, we really have to reach out to other agencies to build and bridge that gap that we are trying to bridge right now. And we know that SRHR is very much integrated with the work of HIV, and that is actually one of the issues that have been neglected for a long time. That's why we said that in all these spaces, we need to have SRHR to be tabled as well, because women living with HIV, girls living with HIV are very much affected by the violence against them, by discrimination, by stigma, and these are actually SRHR issues that are not being addressed. So welcome to this session, and my name again is Bing, and I'll be moderating for our speakers here. So I have Rebecca Matheson. She's the executive director of ARROS, and she's also coordinating the Women's Networking Zone. And Rebecca will be talking about how important it is that that SRHR and HIV movement to be what are the key opportunities for these two movements to build. And I have Murray Proctor. Again, he is the board of the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria. He will talk about, I will just gonna be asking him on what specific SRHR issues that are that he can actually collaborate with us, and that would also same goes to the ambassador for SRH, Mr. Lambert, Grijns. And yeah, so I'll have you to speak about how we can actually build the movement of SRHR and HIV.
Thank you, Bing. My name is Rebecca Matheson. I'm on the International Steering Committee for ICW Global, and ICW is the International Community of Women Living with HIV. We have chapters in every region, and we represent over 15 million women who are part of our organisation. Through broad consultation, we definitely know what the key issues are for women living with HIV, and you've heard about them today, and they've certainly been raised at every level. But I think over the last 12 months, ICW has really recognised and acknowledged that we alone cannot address these issues for women living with HIV when they intersect with sexual and reproductive health. We reached out to the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights and started having a dialogue with them around how we could support women living with HIV to address the many and diverse issues that women were facing around their sexual and reproductive health. This was really an exciting chapter for ICW. We had never, in the long history of ICW, worked closely with the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights, and I think we need to acknowledge as we move forward, without sincere collaboration with like-minded networks and organisations, we won't be able to change and make impact for women living with HIV. I'm just going to talk very briefly about how that collaboration looks and what it means for us, and I guess what it's meant for us at ICW. I mean, certainly ICW holds some institutional seats where we're able to advocate for women living with HIV and talk about their sexual and reproductive health rights. But we found through our collaboration with the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights that doors were open to us that we never had access to before. Doors that we could talk to people about, the sexual and reproductive health rights of women living with HIV in a different context. We were preaching to the converted for so many years in the HIV community, and now that we had access through the Women's Global Network, we were able to talk to workers in the sexual and reproductive health field, healthcare workers that we didn't previously have access to, the formulation of projects and ideas to address the issues that were common across our two networks. And it's just the start, but I think that through the support and the political will of governments and policymakers, the idea of collaboration between the different communities that affect women living with HIV is really the only way that we're going to address some of the very, very serious issues that are facing women living with HIV. I will talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, but I think it's probably time to let the others two have something to say, and I can tease it out a little bit more.
Maybe before we can forward with our two other speakers, I'd just like to ask you what you think are the key opportunities for the HIV and the SRHR communities to work together?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because historically we've been competing for the same pieces of the pie, and that's the way that things have been set up for us, is that when it comes to HIV dollars, if women who are working in the sexual and reproductive health sector wanted to do work in HIV, they were competing for funds against women who were working in the HIV sector. So I think traditionally we weren't friends. And that's common across many sectors that we work with, actually, and that's something that needs to be addressed, because really without collaboration we won't be able to reach the women that we need to reach. And I think there's there's only benefits in collaboration between two women's we're both global networks for women, and the commonality that we have is sexual and reproductive health. And we through our collaboration, we will be able to reach millions of young women, millions of older women, just millions of women, to talk to them about sexual and reproductive health and talk to them about HIV. And we will be able to take back their issues to policymakers jointly through both the global networks. I mean, it's just an amazing opportunity for us to lobby at the highest levels, and we all know there's strength in numbers.
Thank you, Rebecca. And also, I am the moderator, but I'll just have to add a little as part of this agreement that we have with ICW. WGNRR is actually also trying to link to see the connection between HIV and SRHR, and that actually integration it actually really talks about the stigma, the discrimination, the violence that is happening I mean, that is actually committed against women and girls living with HIV. So as we move on, I would like to ask our panelists here. So Mr. Murray, Proctor, what are the specific SRHR issues that you, as the former ambassador against AIDS, Australia's ambassador against AIDS, and in your capacity as the board of the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria, can collaboratively work with the SRHR and HIV movement?
Thanks. I just have to sadly confess I have ceased being on the board of the Global Fund, but thank you so much for saying I am. I was there for about 4 years. Look, thank you very much. And as the AIDS ambassador, I also had in terms of it's the same. We also run a division in our respective governments.
Put your microphone next to you.
Yeah, it's just echoing. So we were in Australia on 2 tracks. One was helping scale up voluntary testing and counselling on HIV, particularly in Papua New Guinea, at the same time as there was a 5-year process of reforming and changing the family planning guidelines that under which we functioned. So to be honest, use that one?
Try the other one.
Still working? Oh, great, thanks. Look, the short answer was Australia dramatically changed its level of funding and policy on family planning over the last 5 years, as it also had increased its funding on access to testing and counselling in the core countries, which are, of course, particularly PNG in the Pacific, and to a degree Indonesia. So the two, it's proof positive. They've travelled on parallel train tracks. There was a lot of debate here about access, what a donor should provide in the way of family planning, sexual reproductive health services. I don't want to get bogged down into the issue of abortion, but it was one of the harder components of that change. But we ended up with a much more liberal approach to what we should be able to provide. So Australia quadrupled its funding for family planning support in the region, at the same time as it continued to have a pretty high investment in access to testing and treatment in similar regional countries. Obviously, in the small countries, this is all done in the one clinic. South Pacific's very small places. There are no parallel structures. Where you get to PNG, and I think to a degree in Indonesia, you do end up with HIV-related services separate from the government-sponsored family planning and other sexual health issues. Okay, I'll do my best. I just keep booming. Okay. So, what's the issue? We didn't integrate well, and of course the issues overlap massively. I think also the Global Fund is the provider of a lot of the external funding for consumables, as of course is UNFPA and IPPF. So there's a few players in the whole mix, and in a sense it's up to each country, national country involved, to do some coordination on that. Final point, I guess, is that around all this we also operate within the Cairo Declaration on population and development. So, you'll see all donors will tend to be a bit the same in terms of access and what they would fund in terms of family planning. I think when you have the 20 years after Cairo going on, it would be very helpful at the high policy level to reflect that in the review that UNFPA is doing at the moment of what are the new issues leading forward from 2014 onwards. So.
Now we don't have that noise there, but we have the noise internally. Yeah. Okay. So later we're gonna be. If I move back. All right. So later we're gonna be going back to Murray's point about the global funds financing to. Actually, he was talking about family planning, but yeah, but I think that's integrated to SRHR, but narrowing SRHR. But moving on. We'll provide a space later for feedbacking and some questions. I'd like to ask our Dutch ambassador on SRH on how can SRHR integration play as an important role or an important strategy to ensure that HIV and AIDS will be more prioritized in this whole post-2015 agenda and this whole conferences and discussions around SRHR?
Well, thank you very much. Let me first of all say that this topic is really close to my heart. It's my full title is I'm the Ambassador for Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights and HIV/AIDS, and we choose that title on purpose, exactly for the reason you're organizing this small event. It's a horrible title, to be honest, because it doesn't fit on my business card, but it says exactly what we try to discuss at this moment. We do see a strong relation between sexual and reproductive health and rights on the one hand and HIV/AIDS on the other hand. I think back to the opening ceremony which we had last Sunday evening, the young Indonesian woman who was on stage and who said, young people such as I am are HIV positive because we didn't get enough education, because we didn't have access to sufficient sexuality education. Yesterday on TV, I think at ABC, there was a Q&A session with a young Australian man, 23 years old. He said, I wouldn't have had HIV if I had had proper education. So the relation between HIV in itself and sexual, the right to have access to education, the right to be able to make informed decisions about your own body, about the most intimate aspects of your life, which is getting a partner, having a sexual relationship, having children, to be knowledgeable about those aspects of life has so much to do with having a HIV or not having HIV. So that relation for me is obvious. Now, the way as a policymaker I look at it, I think in terms of our health policy, for instance, it's extremely important to make sure that you organize integrated health systems where people with HIV, living with HIV, are not treated in a separate vertical manner from people who don't have HIV. it's essential that as for instance, a pregnant woman with HIV, that you can be helped in a health center which offers you the integrated healthcare facilities, including family planning services, but also including the regular health services, through a client-centered approach, which we, as we call it in the Netherlands, accessible, not through very highly advanced technical services, because sometimes treatment of HIV can require very, I should say, specialists. But what you need, if you enter a hospital, you find out that you're HIV positive, that you want to have a regular, accessible service, healthcare service. That's one example. The other example is, I think, the relationship between health and education, not only in terms of the access to sexuality education, but also the access to commodities, and in a wide variety of commodities, where you can choose what you think is proper for you, for your particular situation. And we also have the right to choose so. This morning in Mark Dybel's presentation, he very well illustrated how different people can react when it comes to their own choice on how they want to live. Apparently, according to the statistics, people who use PrEP prefer not to use condoms. There are people who use, male condoms, people who use female condoms. And it all boils down to individual choices on what you think is proper for your situation. So that wide variety of services and of commodities is, I think, extremely important. A third element which I want to mention is access for young people to services and commodities and to knowledge, to education. It's being mentioned again and again and again, but if you don't allow young people to to be able to take those informed decisions, then you're playing with fire, and there are huge risks of for society, I think, of as Nafsia Mboy mentioned it yesterday in that Q&A session on television, to make a decision between curing people or letting them die. So access to education, integrated health services, and focus on young people. I think these are three elements which are essential for the relationship between SRHR and HIV.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that, and it's very, very good that the Dutch government already are implementing the integration of SRH services to HIV. And with that, how do you, as a government, integrate the rights component on SRHR? Especially on service delivery to women living with HIV?
I think it's the most crucial element of this whole discussion, the rights element, and it's also the most difficult, probably. Mireille, you mentioned the ICPD discussions, Cairo 1994. Since then, I think we have been explicitly trying to include the rights, SRHR, in the political debate, and until the day of today, it's maybe the most controversial and most sensitive dimension of this discussion. In the framework of this conference, I think a focus on key populations is a good illustration of our commitment to rights, to sexual rights. The Netherlands is one of the few, unfortunately, and surprisingly, one of the few bigger donors which spends money on programs related to key populations. Bridging the Gaps is a good example of such a program. There's a lot of attention for key populations in this conference, but there's not so much money available yet, and we need to change that. And that's one thing. The other thing is if you speak about young, in particular young women with living with HIV, um, it's hard to imagine that the world accepts such high numbers of young women, extremely young women living with HIV. In some countries, percentages of 25, 30% are the average. From a rights perspective, I would say that's completely not acceptable. So donors and donors assembled here also at this conference should really take that seriously and I think take our responsibilities. The last thing I want to say, as diplomats, and Murray, you must have done it as well when you were AIDS ambassador, but sometimes you are in New York and Geneva and debating and negotiating resolutions. And it's all UN language, and it's, you know, sometimes you think it's hard. Well, it's hard to believe that those texts negotiated over there have an impact on people living here. But it does matter, and I think it's extremely important that over the next year, we all together, governments and civil society organizations together, try to really fully influence the post-2015 agenda and the final definition of targets, goals and targets and indicators on that agenda, because it really does make a difference how our world will look like if we have a sound set of goals and targets, including a relevant set of goals and targets on HIV/AIDS. Thank you.
Okay. With that point around the difficulty and in pushing for SRHR and this whole debate going on post-2015 agenda and this whole issue on lack of funding available for SRHR and HIV integration, how this is actually a really directed question. How do you think you can facilitate, you know, better linkages between SRHR and HIV movement with these kinds of difficulty that we are facing now? I think this question is for you and for Murray.
I think it's the key question, but I'm just a little afraid of seeing this purely in terms of what external funding is available. A lot of what we're talking about can be resolved by countries changing the curricula so their teenagers get sex education, as PNG has done recently, dramatically improved it. You know, it's better management of their core health system, and as well as the sort of promulgation of the legal rights of people to access a fundamental primary health system. All of that's very unsexy and doesn't sell well to politicians. You know, we had a couple of years trying to get various ministers around the world to sign up to health system strengthening, and they fell asleep after the third syllable. But if you talk about maternal and child health, you get support. So in a sense, we also have to be clever. The Cairo Declaration and its follow-on and the post-MDGs are very, very important to get right, as you said. I think to make sure the key objectives are there. But we're in an environment where the domestic mobilisation of resources is just as important now, because we're clearly getting a bit of a plateau of external resources. So it also places a lot of pressure on the countries concerned. And I think we have to see what's happening in Africa, that they are stepping up to the plate on HIV, and that perhaps keep the pressure on these other issues as well.
I'd just like to say something to that. Yeah, thanks, Murray. And I think you raise a really good point. I mean, women living with HIV is so much more than just having babies. And I think when we talk about funding and funding models who find having babies very sexy and acceptable, but when we talk about the other issues that are facing women living with HIV and where they do intersect with sexual and reproductive health, that through strengthening partnerships and collaborations at all levels in this response will only provide, you know, strengthened services, strengthened programs, but, you know, ultimately we need strengthened policy around SRHR and HIV, and you know, we have definitely struggled in terms of having a really strong voice at that policy dialogue around SRHR and HIV. And I think through our strengthened, through our collaboration with other global networks that are working on sexual and reproductive health rights is the only way forward to raise visibility, to raise the issues, but also to raise the funds that we need at the grassroots, at the country level, and also to work with governments to look at integration at a country level. So, yeah.
Well, just on a very, very practical note, but if I look at the organizations, especially civil society organizations working in the field on HIV/AIDS and or on SRHR, in the Dutch situation, I don't see so much difference. I think most organizations are working on both fields, but they come probably from different angles. And over the last years, I think altogether we have come to the conclusion that it does make sense to work in separate fields. So, and I sometimes especially also here in this conference, I see organizations which are working on HIV/AIDS only, whereas all the examples which you mentioned and which others are mentioning here relate to the wider connection to, for instance, education and broader health issues. There's a great example of a Dutch NGO which is called Dance for Life. And I like it for two reasons. The first reason is that they make their work attractive for young people. They are very good at marketing, just as a marketing machine. They through dancing and all kind of attractive games and presentations and gadgets, they make talking about sex, sexuality, including HIV, attractive. The other thing is that they make the link between HIV and sexual behavior in general, and not because of HIV, but because of trying to share with others how it is to behave responsibly, and responsibly not according to certain norms and standards which parents or which older people impose on them, but responsibly according to what young people think is responsibly. I was really surprised. The figure which I saw in the Netherlands is of young people having sex for the first time, 80%. So 4 out of 5 use a condom. I found it extremely high. When I discussed that with my 15-year-old daughter, she said, "Oh, 80%. So what about the other 20%?" So she found it low. She found the figure extremely low because she was thinking about 1 in 5 who's not using a condom at first time sexual contact. And it says something about how young people, I think, are looking at this debate. And it also says a bit about risks, because if out of 5 people for the first time don't use a condom in the Netherlands, with a lot of sexually transmitted diseases around, apparently our education system is still not yet sufficient. And as a parent, I also feel responsibility for this, because maybe I didn't discuss sufficiently with my children. So there's always this link between HIV and the broader context of SRHR. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have to catch from your last point about the young people, because my next question would be around ensuring the participation of young people and how we actually are able to build the capacity of young people to get engaged in this whole debate that we are on, and to also have this meaningful participation, for example, in conferences, in all events and opportunities there are. How are we able to ensure that at this time you actually really underscore the fact that you like how you actually said that I am a positive person, because as a young person I did not have the access to right information. So with that in mind, how we are going to facilitate that these young people are able to practice their sexuality, their reproductive rights, their sexual and reproductive rights, knowing that this is actually they're as human rights, and these are human rights that every people have, and Yeah, so
Well, obviously, I'm a young woman, but I wouldn't like to speak on behalf of young women living with HIV. But certainly at ICW, we have some experience of listening to young women living with HIV. And certainly, they talk to us about fear of accessing sexual and reproductive health services. They talk about discrimination. They talk about violence. And when they talk about violence, they talk about forced and coerced sterilisation. They talk about forced abortion. They talk about denial of services. And so, at one level, when we talk to young women about mobilising and stepping up to speak as young women living with HIV, they bring this background with them, and we've really struggled to mobilise large numbers of young women living with HIV to step up and speak about these issues and to mobilise. So at ICW, we recognise and acknowledge that strengthening our partnership with other global networks of women who have cadres of young women who are working for them and with them, that we can collaborate and support our young women living with HIV to raise their visibility, but with support of other young women who are already working or volunteering in other areas. So I think it's definitely a challenge for young women living with HIV because of those barriers that I've just talked about. But we need to do more. We definitely need to do more to create sustainable succession planning for young women to step up into these roles.
Without diminishing the horrendous challenge you've just outlined, my take, just in a number of countries I've dealt with, is that even for people who are not HIV positive, for young women, this is immensely hard. I keep falling back to Papua New Guinea. It's our nearest neighbour, has a prevalence rate of 1% for that matter, but a very high death rate in childbirth and quite a high pregnancy rate of teenagers. So why is that? Well, traditional culture makes that dialogue very, very hard to have in many parts of East Asia, I think, as well as the Pacific. But in PNG's case, and the reason I pick it is an awful lot of the healthcare providers are actually church-based. So whilst in one sense we'd all hope the churches are exactly the venue for that discussion, in reality they can drive away young women from seeking access because their parents are more likely to be told about it, or they're more likely to be given a moral lecture that they're doing something wrong. And so there's a booth on the interfaith dialogue up here, which I really like, because there's a real strand we've got to taste. The churches should be the moral entities on the side of the people who are oppressed, not oppressing them. Sorry, message of the day.
Here, here.
oh, okay. Before I actually ask them for the, before I'll ask the last question, are there questions from the floor? Any thoughts? Any words? Any questions directly directed to our panelists? Shubha?
Thank you for the presentations to everyone. And I'm really glad that in all the forums that I have been to, young people has been one of the main issues of discussion, and that we really appreciate as young people. But the thing here is, like, most of the programs that has been implemented for young people, either young people with key affected population, young people living with HIV and AIDS, most of the programs are like planned and implemented by not young people. And like, we really respect adult, and having youth adult partnerships is very interesting. But having young people in the position to implement those programs are also very crucial, that we all have recognized and appreciated. So it's not a question, but I think there is a gap of space where we can actually work on the issue and not just volunteer, which is the case in most of the cases. And then we are paying for coming for conferences and contributing our time outside our education and jobs to do these stuff. So I don't know, how can we assure that we have more employment opportunities, or at least some kind of support for young people who are working on the issue?
Thank you, Shubha. Yeah, good point about when you're actually trying to strengthen and build movement, you also have to engage the young people and to have their meaningful space in the whole discussion. because I get it. I get this a lot from our colleagues, young people, and say that, you know what, it feels like I'm being tokenized. So yeah, and we are talking here and saying that we need to strengthen the movement, and that movement actually also involve the young people. Yeah, which unfortunately we don't have someone in the panelist right now. I am not. So on my last question, perhaps actually is having or asking your thoughts or commitments, perhaps your commitments on how to move forward to build and strengthen these partnerships that are going on right now.
Well, I just want to add a few words to what you say because I think it's very valuable. You're really hitting the nail on the head because there's a lot of comments from young people who say, well, we're not in the driver's seat. You should not, we old people, Mira and I, old people, should not speak about the young people, but let the young people do the speaking themselves. But I don't agree with that because there are a lot of young, very vocal people, very vocal young people, like the Indonesian woman at the opening ceremony, many others around here who are really capable of saying what they want to say. The point is exactly what you're hinting at, the lack of capacity at implementation level, because most of you are volunteers. There are very few professional youth organizations run by young people. We are funding a youth organization in Uganda, but when I visited it, there were older people who were running the organization. So they start as a youngster and then they grow up they have their career in the organization, and in the end it's all 40, and they are in the 40s and the 50s. So it's something which we really take seriously as a donor as well. We also think about how we can improve that part of this discussion. I very much agree with you. Thank you for that comment. Yeah.
Could I just mention a couple of things? I wanted to sort of not to be too gloomy about this. There are examples where improvements have been made and are continuing. Some years ago, a number of us with UNFPA launched Sprint, which did what you should have always thought we should be doing, which is in emergencies, making sure that women have access to reproductive health, logistics, material, keep continuing access to contraceptives, female needs, and in the case of HIV positive people, access to those drugs as well. And that's a really popular initiative with decision makers, and it fits just to clear an enormous need because, of course, in an emergency, all the old structures are gone. The health system, women are very vulnerable to attack, and they are finding it very hard to find providers that will deal with all their sexual health needs. The second of three things was the law is improving. PNG, the police used to arrest women because they carried a condom that proved they were a sex worker. They used to parade them down the street, forcing them to chew condoms. That's all gone. Structured work with the police makes women less afraid of going to access sexual health clinics. And finally, perhaps we should look at where we can... I was very taken by Mark Dybel's comments this morning. Let's target down on our needs and where we can do best. I have some friends who are working, and you will laugh now, on improving women's voices, young women's voices and confidence in the Pacific through the Girl Guides, others through the YWCA. And when you think about it, those are the safe spaces where young women, particularly, in some places young men, can have a dialogue, can be trained to be confident, and with the right leaders, they can move forward. So, there's still paths to take we haven't pushed hard enough on.
Thanks, Murray. I just had a bit of a brainwave. We really need to have a think tank and bring all the young women and women living with HIV and the policymakers together and have a think tank about how we can actually, really strengthen the intersections between HIV and SRHR. But I think from ICW's perspective, we have an ongoing commitment to women and girls living with HIV to advocate on their behalf, to ensure professional, safe and appropriate sexual and reproductive health services are available to them. But on another level, we continue our commitment to collaborate with people who are working on sexual and reproductive health to take up those issues at the highest policy levels, at national, regional and global levels, to ensure that we don't lose the momentum that's happening around HIV and sexual and reproductive health.
And we should mention the moderator single-handedly almost reformed access to sexual health services in the Philippines. So let us thank you for that as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, part of our commitment with ICW, and to add to the point that Rebecca actually also pointed out, that WGNRR also is ensuring that in this whole post-2015 agenda that we are actually engaging on, we are pushing for holistic, rights-based and integrated approach to SRHR, and not just only a catch all phrase SRHR, but to have and to clarify always that when we mean that it should be holistic and it should be rights-based when we are talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. And if there are no questions on the floor, I would like to thank our panelists for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much. And it came really as a surprise for you to come. Thank you so much.